You are listening to the Lawyer Stories podcast with host Benny Gold. Lawyer Stories was founded in July 2017 on Instagram and is an expanding global network of lawyers and law students sharing their personal journeys to the noble profession of the practice of law. Join us on this podcast as we dig deeper into these stories and hear from lawyers and law students from around the world in all areas of the legal profession. Here at Lawyer Stories, we believe that every lawyer has a story. What's yours?
Welcome to the Lawyer Stories podcast with Benny Gold, episode 14. Today, very excited for our special guest, Adam Zimmerman. How are you doing out there, Zimmy?
Doing great, Ben. Thanks for having me.
So as we approach, the date of this recording is the 18th of June, 2020. But as we approach the 3-year anniversary, which is July 8th, 2020, because Lawyer Stories was founded July 8th, 2017, we wanted to have the first person to ever be featured on Lawyer Stories in the Lawyer Stories feed, over 1,200 lawyers and law students, and actually a personal friend of mine from Portland, Maine, from growing up, Adam Zimmerman. So Zimbo, Zimmy, like the crew would call him. He was the brave soul. I told him my idea. I said, hey, this is what I want to do. It has evolved. So Adam did write a little blurb. It has evolved over time, but since to what it was. But thanks, Adam. I appreciate you, first of all, being the first brave soul to submit your story and to be featured.
Absolutely. I loved talking about the idea with you, and when you approached me about it back then, I was excited to share my story at the time, and certainly my story has evolved a lot in the last 3 years. So
yeah, and absolutely, and we did a second feature on you July 8th. A second feature December 6th, 2018. So that was a follow-up. You got a lot of good engagement on that, and it's really cool, man. Like I've been waiting to have you on the show because obviously, like I mentioned, like we grew up together, Portland, Maine. You went to the rival high school,
yes, indeed.
Portland High School. I went to Deering High School. You know, we always would talk about law school. Like I've seen you go through it. You went to you went to Brandeis, right?
Yep.
And,
yes, started at
went
Boston
on
College.
Law.
Yep. Spent a year at Boston College undergrad, and then decided Brandeis was a better fit for me. Spent the last 3 years there. Worked for about 6 years between college and law school, and Suffolk Law.
So let's take it back. Like, I always knew you as somebody who very political. I think what was your bar mitzvah theme again? Let's read
It was the 2020 Democratic National Convention.
Right, which we are coming up on, which is totally legit. So let's take it all the way back. So like growing up in Portland, Maine.
Yep.
Like what was that like? Like first of all, let's visit the fact that you're legally, how do you like to go about saying this?
Legally blind, visually impaired. Yeah, either one.
You're visually impaired. You're legally blind. Like what was that like in the Portland area? Like growing up there?
It was easier as a kid in a lot of ways than it was once I grew up, because kids can't drive. So it's sort of expected that your parents are going to drive you everywhere and take you to swim practice or t-ball or whatever it is, or even school most days, or you're going to walk to school. But once you become an adult, and Portland is not a public transit friendly city,
right.
It was a lot harder to navigate as an adult, which is a large part of the reason that I'm not still there. But growing up, it wasn't really nearly as much of an issue as it became later in life. But I mean, there were other things about my vision impairment that made life in general, not specific to Portland, Maine, a challenge, right? Like the sports that I loved, by and large, couldn't play. That was tough, especially because that was still is how young men and boys, get to really get together and get to know each other. So not being on a lot of those teams was always tough for me. But that's why I focused on a lot of the more academic things, right? I was the water boy for the football team in high school, things like that.
I gotta say, like, all our lives, like, I mean, you always put yourself out there. I feel like we'd take Boston trips with the community. That was like the biggest city, like 2 hours south of where we lived. You always knew everything about Boston. You were always involved. You have like 1 million. I think you're at capacity on Facebook, like to friends. Like you have like 1 million friends, and it's something to be like very proud of. I mean, like you had this thing that like the sports thing, but you've done and accomplished more, than a lot of people can. And I say bravo to you. I'm officially saying like, it's amazing. Like, so I kudos and bravo to you.
I was very lucky. Listen, I think it's important to say this because my parents, and this is different from most kids with disabilities, unfortunately. My parents told me from a very young age, short of being a NASCAR driver, there's nothing you can't do, right? And like I said, most kids with disabilities don't get that message. So that's the biggest blessing I had in my life. They had a support system. I mean, I was their firstborn, and they were in their mid and late 20s. And in 1978, you have a kid with a disability, they could have easily freaked out. They didn't. And they had a great support system. And even the services in Maine for people with blindness and visual impairment were a huge resource for me growing up. And one of the big misconceptions I think about people with disabilities is that somehow if they have any kind of physical disability, there's an assumption that people make that somehow their intellectual abilities are less than. And that thankfully was never the case for me.
No, which is totally false, and you totally diffuse that because you're one of the smartest dudes out there. So
thank you. Yeah. And the other thing I always like to say is in that same vein is I always tell people when they ask me, like, if I had one thing to educate people who don't have a disability about people with disabilities, is expect more, right? Don't expect less, because the moment you expect less from somebody, you get less. And, the more that was expected of me, the better I did and the more I achieved. So.
Right. It's amazing. So like, when was the moment, one thing I asked a lot of the guests on the show, like, when was the moment that it hit you, like, I'm going to be a lawyer?
The moment I knew I was actually going to be a lawyer was when grades came in after 1L year. And I went, okay, I didn't fail.
Okay, all right, let's move back a little bit. So that's very good. You took me literal. You used the lawyer response on that. I like it.
Yes.
When did you decide that you were going to go to law school?
So I was working in San Francisco at the time, and I was working as an attorney headhunter. Most people who work as attorney recruiters, attorney headhunters for external agencies have been or are practicing attorneys. I was not. I was just a precocious mid-20-something who had just moved to San Francisco. And I was talking with all these attorneys at these big firms, mostly associates, a few partner level, but mostly, 3 to 5 year associates at these major firms. And, I had no doubt after talking with them, not to be egotistical, that if they could do it, I could do it. And I kind of took the LSAT on a whim. Most of the LSAT tests are very visual education training type methods, right? It wasn't going to work for me. So I didn't take any LSAT prep course. I did not, to be candid, have a great undergraduate background. I went to Brandeis, but I was on the debate team. I was working on campaigns, and class got in the way of both of those things.
Yep.
So my undergraduate GPA was very different from where I ended up placing on the LSATs.
Okay.
And so really it was just a matter of thinking, I thought about it as a young person for a long time, but I didn't think the technology for me to be able to read case law in 2001 when I graduated from Brandeis was where I needed it to be for me to be able to go to law school. By the time I started in the fall of 2007, all my books were on digital CD and I could read them on the computer.
Wow.
Instead of trying to read them in paperback form or hard book form. So that was the big change that allowed me to say, okay, I can do it now.
Wow, that's amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
So like, did you take notes like when you wanted to highlight something, like, or was it a highlighter on there, or what? Like, how did that work? Because my books are all marked up. They look like work. And you're lucky. Mine are all down in the basement. I could throw them out the window. I mean, that's. which
I'm very fortunate. It's one of the ways that I adapted because of my disability is that my memory is ridiculous.
Wow.
And so if I heard it in class, and unlike in college where I never went to class, I don't think I missed a class in law school. And if I had taken the notes, I remembered the notes. Now, in terms of the reading, I mean, I read enough case law, I read enough of the reading to be able to speak educatedly about it in class. But most of the exams were about what was in class, not what was hidden in the reading. So, you know, I did enough reading to do the work, but really focused on the classwork.
Okay. Sounds good. So tell me, like, being visually impaired, how did you navigate law school at Suffolk? Like, you know, given that there must have been an additional challenge there.
Yeah, I mean, luckily Suffolk law at least is one building.
Right.
So as soon as you learn that physical layout and where most of the big lecture halls are versus where some of the side rooms were, even the library. I mean, they have, you know, carols at each of the desks for the library, but I needed my own room because I needed assistive technology. I needed to have my books on computer, and I also needed a lot of other, a second computer basically to do the reading, and then a second one to take notes on.
Right.
And so they had a specific office there was actually two or three other students at the time. That was kind of the visually impaired study room. So it was a windowless room, which I guess blind guys don't need windows. But it was a windowless room in the library where the three or four of us would study at various points. And I would go in there early on a Saturday and someone would knock on the door like 7 at night and they'd be like, "Hey, Zim, we're closing."
Wow.
Okay. But I almost never went in the library during the week. It was really only on Saturdays that I did the outlining, the studying, and you know, did what I needed to do at home if there was reading in between. But
wow.
Yeah, it certainly made life. I mean, it always makes life interesting. I mean, the cane. I use a blind cane to get around. I don't have a guide dog. I have a rescue dog who is completely. He would guide me into trees, not anywhere I needed to go.
So what happened with that? Did you just like get rid of the dog? Or?
But so I have my cane, and you know that allowed me to get around the school, and people noticed it, right? So people tend to dodge the, you know, wide dude with the blind stick, right? They tend to be smart about going, you know, he can't see me, so I'm going to get out of his way.
Hey, you probably knew everybody at school, right?
I did. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So I know you started practicing in New England.
Yep.
And then you moved on. You're in Arizona now, right? Phoenix area. So,
yep.
Like, besides from the weather, like, what's the big difference being out there?
I think, you know, one of the differences is the speed of life. You know, in Boston, not so much in Portland. I mean, although Portland is kind of a mini Boston in a lot of ways, but certainly in Boston, Boston is a mini New York, right? It's that New England rapid fire. Everybody knows each other. Have to do it yesterday. Speed of life out here is just more chill. I mean, I'm not practicing law right now. I'm using all those skills. But even in the law firms, I have a couple of friends who are practicing out here. Even in the bigger firms, they're not billing, you know, 1,800, 2,000, 2,400 hours. They're billing 1,600, 1,700 hours, and it's just a much better quality of life. They get in, well, nobody gets in anywhere right now because of the quarantine, but, you know, normally they're getting in around 8:30, quarter of 9, and they're out by 6.
Wow,
you know?
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
So.
That's awesome. So, like,
yeah.
So in your private practice, like when you were there, when you were actually doing it, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the private practice. Like, how does it compare working for a big company like CVS?
Yep.
Besides those huge receipts, you don't have to hand out like receipts.
Well, now we're supposed to remind everybody they can get the digital receipts on the app, so they don't have to get the long paper things. But anyway,
I think somebody used one as like a window shade.
Yeah, right. No, private practice was good. I did not enjoy working for myself. I went into private practice largely because of two factors. One was the time when I graduated from law school, right, which was spring of 2010, right in the midst of the economic downturn, and that, as you know, impacted lawyers maybe more than any other single industry in terms of employment opportunities for new members of the bar. So I worked for a firm in Portland, Maine, for about a year, and it was always going to be just that year. There was never going to be another opportunity. They had a few big projects that year they needed assistance with. I did that, and then I went into private practice. It was never my goal. Honestly, my biggest fear, but at the time, I just decided I had to do something. I can't.
So you worked for, I remember that, you worked for a firm for a year in Portland, right? Okay.
Yeah, for about a 40 attorney firm, which for Portland is pretty good size.
Yep.
And it was mostly personal injury insurance defense and a little bit of employment practices liability, which I really enjoyed. And I had taken a lot of employment law courses in law school, so I decided that if I'm going to go into private practice, it's going to be to do employment law, and that's what I did. And marketing was new to me. I had worked on campaigns for a long time, but I was always marketing somebody else. That was easy. I did not like boasting about myself.
Right.
So I did have to do that. I did actually not have a very hard time getting clients. What I didn't take into account was that when you're mostly working with people who've lost their job, and you're working on contingency,
right?
You know, the expenses that you have to pay until you either settle or win the case can get pretty substantial, and that's what happened to me.
Right. So you had to front it or whatnot, and then
yeah. So things like, postage and whatnot wasn't a big deal, but some of the filing fees, certainly depot costs, got very expensive very quick. And the deal I had in all my engagement letters was, I'm going to send you a bill at the end of the month once you've accrued more than $50 in expenses.
Yeah.
And they never paid. They just never paid.
Yeah.
So I ended up having to close the practice. I ended up doing consulting for a couple of years on the employer side, mostly for small employers, a few medium-sized, and basically saying, hey, you guys have had, what I did was, because this is the way I think, I went and looked at court records, and I saw companies that had been sued multiple times over like a 10-year period for employment law issues. And I said, well, I'm not going to represent them as a lawyer, but what if I tell them I can help them, so that they do the right thing so they don't get sued again?
Right. So you went to the court and you found those.
Yeah, well, I accessed them online. Yeah, through Lexis. Like, what are some of the companies that keep appearing?
Okay.
In the records. Yep.
So you got hired to do, like you said, hey, this is what I do, and this is what I found. Wow, that's pretty good. Yeah. So you started. I mean, that's pretty smart. So you were able to do that for a year or two, right?
Yeah, I did that for about 2.5, almost 3 years. And then, CVS came knocking, and I was still in Maine at the time, and they said, well, you can work from home. And I said, guys, I've been working from home for 6.5, almost 7 years. I'm going to move to Rhode Island and come work for you there. So I did.
Oh, really? So CVS then you could work from home in Maine?
They did. Yep.
So that was a question. So you really didn't even want to be in Maine. So you wanted to move out and go to Rhode Island, huh?
Yeah, Rhode Island was certainly not my dream location, but it was important for me to be in an office setting.
Yep.
And be around other people, and be more than 2 feet. Have my office be more than 2 feet from the edge of my bed.
Right.
That was important to me. So.
Right. Well, you did some YouTube stuff for a while too. I remember you were really cranking it up there. I mean, that was interesting. I thought that was really cool. You were putting yourself out there and on YouTube. But I don't know if you want to say anything about that. You don't have to. But I'm happy you are at CVS. I mean, it's a great company. So.
It's a great company, and they've treated me amazingly. I am incredibly blessed to be there. They really like the work I'm doing, which is why when I said to them after about a year, hey, I want to stay in this job, but I don't want to stay in Rhode Island. Can I move to Scottsdale? They were like, yeah, cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, the YouTube stuff, I've done it kind of in two phases. So the first was when I was still doing consulting and really having a tough time emotionally with what I felt like was perpetual self-employment. And some of that, and I'll be really candid, some of the reasons I didn't get jobs, and I'm not going to point out specific jobs, but I applied for jobs consistently for the entire time I was self-employed, both as a practicing lawyer and then also in the consulting. And I know that one of the big reasons I did not get an opportunity was because of my disability. There's just no doubt in my mind about that, because when you have those interviews, I mean, I had an interview that I can think of off the top of my head where I got the interview and went in with my cane to the interview. They didn't know I was visually impaired because I took that off my resume because I wasn't even getting interviews.
Wow. Yep.
And I came in, and even I could see the double take they did when I came in with my cane. And I knew right away, as soon as they had that look on their face, that there was an elephant in the room. And no matter how many ways you say it's not going to be a problem, you can still hire me, there was no way I was getting that job.
And that was a firm in Portland?
I'm not going to say where it was, but yeah, there were firms in a couple different locations. Yeah.
Fair enough. So would you say, and I'm not trying to call out your specific law school, but in general, like, does law school prepare a student to get out into the legal world? Like, do you think they do enough?
I don't. I think, and I have a slightly slanted view, right? Because I did graduate at the time that I graduated. I think if I had graduated in 2005, I might feel differently. Graduating in 2010, no, I don't think, and I certainly at that time don't think law schools were honest about the employment situation. I think if you look at the fact that enrollment in law school has gone down substantially since 2010, that's part of the reason, is because schools were not honest about after school employment opportunities. Top 14 schools, top 5 schools, they're always going to have jobs. But if you don't go to one of those Ivy League or slightly below Ivy League level schools, even now, the employment opportunities are nowhere near what they were pre-2008. They just aren't. And
so Zimmy, let me ask you this. Did you ever have a mentor?
Not really. I've never been a mentor type.
Okay.
I think it's a good thing to have. Yep. I have mentored others, but I have never been the type who's really sought out someone to be a mentor. I've had people that have been, that I've really respected, that have been role models for me. I even had a former boss who was actually also a candidate for governor in Massachusetts, who was a big role model of mine and was generous enough to write my law school recommendation letter.
Yep.
But beyond that, no, I'm not really a mentor type guy.
Okay. So like how are you using at CVS? How do you use your legal skills? Like what kind of work are you doing?
So I am doing internal HR investigations. So we have 300,000 employees.
Wow.
Focusing more so from my practice on the retail side. We have other investigators that do some of the other divisions of CVS. I also am handling some of the corporate cases that are generated from our corporate facilities. Thankfully, right now, because of everyone working from home, there's not nearly as many of those cases.
Right.
But on the retail side, I'm investigating everything from time card falsification, any kind of EEO type complaint, any sort of what we call major policy violation or violation of law goes to our investigative team in employee relations. So I'm using my employment law skills every single day. I'm also using not just the litigation side, which is what I did in private practice, but a lot of what I would call employment law counseling, right? Where I'm going to leaders and saying, hey, I didn't substantiate this allegation that was made, but I did find these problems. Let's deal with this before we get another complaint unrelated, right, about a different thing. because I spotted this issue that's going to come up eventually. So a lot of proactive employee relations work, which I really enjoy.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. So like, and okay, so you're happy, you like doing it. Like, I mean, obviously I wouldn't say like, I kind of want to ask you if you ever see yourself going into law again or doing something on the side with law.
No. No.
Okay.
I've had my licenses lapse. I didn't even go inactive. I just said, you know what? I'm never practicing again. So my Maine and Massachusetts licenses are inactive. They're going to stay that way.
So you took Maine and Mass. You passed Maine.
Yeah, I took Maine and Mass simultaneously. And I was lucky enough to pass those. I've always been a pretty good test taker. But yeah, it's if the right opportunity came up and somebody said to me, we want you to practice, would I consider it in a company like I am now? Maybe. Would I ever apply for a job that was, at a law firm again? No. Would I ever apply for a job that was probably even in a law department at a company other than the one I'm already at? No.
Well, it sounds like you're in a pretty good place now, and I'm happy for you, man. You're a mensch. You're a true mensch. And one thing I could say is like, I mean, I could say a lot of nice things about Zimbo, but like when times are rough and like, maybe some other person has something positive going on, you're always the first one to congratulate the other person, regardless of what's going on in your situation. And like, I noticed that, and like a lot of people can't do that. They can't inside. They can't. They can't be happy for somebody else if maybe something's not going 100% the way that they want it to go. So, I've always appreciated your attitude and positive attitude, and like, so that's great on you. Like, thanks for always being that way. It's a great way to be, like a true mentor.
Yeah, man, thank you. I went through, and this. I'm not saying anything that's going to surprise you. I went through some really dark times during those long periods of unemployment. That's what some of my YouTube videos were about. Just really raw and honest. But the reality is just because I'm going through a dark time doesn't mean the people that I love and care about are. And I'm always going to be there for them, no matter how I'm feeling. That's just how I was raised.
It's truly awesome, because a lot of people, just can't do that. They can't see it. Like, they just don't want to be happy for somebody else if things aren't always going right for them. The lawyer stories thing, again, like, it's really cool, man, that like you were the first one that we're able to feature. We've featured over 1,200 people. That's Lawyer Stories at lawyer_stories on Instagram. We're also on Facebook, Lawyer Stories. Zim, we'd love to have you write a blog post. If you have anything pre-written, we could put it on our blog at thelawyerstories.com/blog. And now the podcast. I'm hoping the podcast is going to be like a big thing. We put it on YouTube. We have it on Spotify. We have it on Apple Podcasts. So we've been working really hard at this for 3 years. I know you've seen since the beginning when I was like, okay, I have an idea. I need Zimmy. Zimmy, you'll be the brave person who does this for me. I know you'll do it. And of course,
never said no.
Zimmy, you send me the story. There it is.
Yep, absolutely. It's been a pleasure for me to watch it evolve, like from that first idea to what you've built out of it. I think it's awesome, and you've made it not just an American thing, but really worldwide. I mean, every time I look at the Lawyer Stories on Instagram, I'm astounded by some of the places that you're able to get people to send their stories in from, including countries that I wouldn't have necessarily even thought Lawyer Stories would be allowed to reach.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they're not. I hope I'm not getting in trouble. But I wake up to like direct messages from people in like all over the world. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Absolutely.
And it's cool. Like, I feel like I can go somewhere and like have a few friends here, a few friends there. I mean, maybe like one day we'll have another Lawyer Stories party like we did back in Miami. That was a good time.
Yeah.
That might be a while. So.
I hear Scottsdale's a good place to party when there's not a pandemic going on.
Yeah, what's that now?
So.
What's that now, Zimmy?
I said I hear Scottsdale's a good place to party when there's not a pandemic going on.
I've never been out to Arizona, so that's that's an option. You might have to give me a reason to get out there, Zim.
Absolutely, bud.
So, hey, is there anything else you want to say to the crowd out here today that's all listening, all of our millions of fans that are listening?
You know, the only thing I'll say is if you go back and you look at that first story that I wrote for Ben, it was pretty pessimistic about law and in some ways about law school and about life. It was true at the time. I'm not going to say it wasn't, because that would also be a lie. But I think I was not in a place. I mean, I was honored to do it, but I wasn't in a place to be objective about law and law school. I'm very lucky that in those short 3 years, my life has taken a complete 180, and I'm very, very blessed to have the life that I have now and to be able to look back on law school and on the law in general with more clarity and more objectiveness than I had then. So
it's great. Thanks, Zim. How can people get a hold of you if they want to contact Zim, who has many social media outlets and ways to get in touch with you?
Yes, you can certainly always find me on Facebook. As Ben said, I'm certainly a presence on there. I also am on Instagram. I think Zim719, I think, is my Instagram. And listen, I'm happy to take email from people if you have questions. Adam.Zimmerman719@gmail.com.
That's awesome. So Zim, I really appreciate you being on episode 14. The first pioneer, the mensch, the first person ever featured on Lawyer Stories, Adam Zimmerman. Thanks, bud. And, personal friend of mine from growing up in Portland, Maine, the P-Town crew. We love it.
Yes, indeed.
So it's always great to see you. We'll do some Zoom partying soon. Say hello to Sarah and Bartlett.
I certainly will.
And wherever you are in the world today, enjoy yourselves. Cheers.
Cheers.
The Lawyer Stories podcast is produced by Marketing the Law. Are you looking at your social presence every day? Potential clients are. Learn how to magnetize your brand with the help of Marketing the Law. Find us on Instagram at Marketing the Law to learn more.